Hello, everyone. I'm David Cupp, the Executive Editor of Occupational Health and Safety Magazine. Welcome to today's webinar presentation, Inspections versus Audits, Knowing the Difference and Using Both to Improve Safety. Today's webinar is brought to us by Dakota Software. Many thanks to them for making today's presentation possible. I'm excited about today's topic as understanding the difference between inspections and audits is important. It can help improve workplace safety. And we've got three expert speakers who are going to share a lot of insights onto that subject with you. Our speakers today are Jay Finnegan. He's Compliance Services Leader with Dakota Software. Jay has held various educational, technical, and managerial positions, including as a corporate auditor, and has degrees in mechanical engineering, business administration, operations, research, and law. He's also a certified hazardous materials manager, certified ventilation inspector, and holds a lean manufacturing certification. Next up is Susie Housley. She's a product manager with Dakota Software. She works with safety professionals to ensure Dakota's solutions meet their needs, including changing needs. She's a former inspection program manager, holds a PhD in environmental science, and has more than 15 years in the technology space. And then third up, we've got Bob Kimball. He's product marketing with Dakota Software. In his 12 years at Dakota, Bob has worked with industry professionals to understand and address the challenges facing health and safety leaders, and he has led countless presentations, panels, and roundtables on technology's evolving role in safety and compliance management. And having seen our trio's presentation, I can tell you that we're in for a really informative session. But before we get started, I want to go through a few housekeeping items really quick. At the end of the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A session where Jay, Susie, and Bob will answer a few questions from all of you. However, you can submit a question at any point during the webinar. If you'd like to do that, all you have to do is use the Ask a Question console on your screen. And again, you can do that at any point while they're talking. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, click the Help button located below the slide window, and you'll receive technical assistance. And then also after this virtual event, you'll receive an email containing a link to an archive of today's presentation so that you can go back and replay it or maybe share it with a coworker who's missed it. Okay, with all that out of the way, we're ready to kick things off. So I'm going to hand things over to our first speaker, who's going to be Bob. Bob, why don't you take it away?
All right. Thank you, David. Yes, I'm very excited also to be talking about inspections and audits. I'm going to share some of the observations on their key differences and their similarities, and then my colleagues Jay and Susie are going to dive into some of the details of these programs. We're also going to conduct a few short polls along the way and share those results so that everyone on the call can get a sense of, the finger of the pulse of the attendees and how they're feeling about these programs. So I know all of you on the call might not be familiar with Dakota Software, so you might be wondering why we are an authority on the topic. So I wanted to share a little bit of information about who we are. To begin, we introduced the first ever EHS auditing product way back in 1988. Way back then, we actually delivered our software and our regulatory updates via floppy disks in the mail, eventually CDs. So it's been that long. Of course, now we are all cloud-based, and while we offer a full suite of EHS management products, compliance, safety and compliance management remains our core focus. So over the past 35 plus years, we've worked with organizations large and small across different industries, and these companies have used our products to manage safety and compliance, as well as to adherence to management systems such as ISO 45000. And we've worked hand in hand with safety leaders from these companies to help develop and refine these products. So a few years ago, we noticed a trend in the type of requests we were getting. Companies were asking for demos of our audit solution, but they were saying things like, we just want the checklist, or we don't need the regulatory information. They were also looking to add hundreds of users for the products and not just a handful or a dozen. And the analytics they were looking for skewed more towards quantitative than qualitative. What those companies were looking for, of course, was an inspection solution. And so while our clients have used our auditing product in the past to conduct inspections, we recognized there was a definite need and set about creating a product designed specifically for inspection management. So we'll share some of the details on that, and we'll touch on that process. But first, we want to talk about why the confusion. What happened that the terms audit and inspection suddenly started to be used interchangeably? Well, first, there are many similarities between the two. They both incorporate checklists. They both require objective evaluation. They both involve correction and analysis, and all with an eye towards continuous improvement. Next, globalization. The world has gotten a lot smaller. The languages, phrases are commingling throughout regions, and the search for software is essentially borderless now. And then software companies are partly to blame themselves. Us and some of our other companies in the space use the term audit and inspection in different ways. The term inspection itself is somewhat problematic. Are we talking about an internal inspection, or is an OSHA inspector at our door? And that causes a bit of confusion. But the big thing really is mobile devices. We have a lot more people, especially on the inspection side, involved in the process, utilizing these tools, and then using the language that they see in the products that they touch, and then it kind of spreads throughout to their colleagues. So we're going to share our observations on what these key differences are up front. So at a high level, inspections examine objects and physical conditions in order to verify conformance, versus audits where we're evaluating processes and systems to make sure to assure compliance with requirements. To get more specific, though, inspections, well, they can focus on regulations and systems. They tend to have a narrower focus and a limited scope. Inspections rely on observations of behaviors and conditions. Audits tend to be more comprehensive and focused on compliance to regulatory requirements and adherence to management systems. They examine processes, procedures, and policies, not just physical conditions. When it comes to frequency, inspections are conducted often, occurring quarterly, monthly, weekly, sometimes even daily, depending upon the nature of the inspection. They're usually shorter in duration, sometimes taking just minutes to complete. Audits, on the other hand, conducted less frequently. And this frequency is determined by organizational policies or the management team priorities. Sometimes they're based on areas of the highest perceived risk or on requirements for certification bodies. And audits tend to be lengthy. They can take days to complete sometimes. And then who conducts the audits, or who conducts the inspections of the audits, and how much preparation time is required also varies greatly. Inspections are usually conducted by site staff requiring specialized or targeted training. Inspections utilize simple checklists, and then once those checklists are established, there's really not a lot of prep time involved. Audits are usually conducted by subject matter experts with a broader experience with environmental health and safety topics. Audits may be conducted by internal staff, such as a corporate audit team or specially designated safety or environmental health and safety staff, or by a third party. And because of their comprehensive nature, audits require significant preparation and documentation time. And then finally, the resulting actions. Often issues from inspections can be corrected on the spot. Analysis of inspection results can be used to identify trends by facility or topic. Inspection procedures themselves may actually be subject to an audit. Audits result in more detailed management reports, and they include findings and recommendations rather than specific corrections. And audits might also require a root cause analysis before creating any corrective actions, which can take weeks or months to do. But we really don't want to see these as opposing forces. We see inspections and audits as indeed complementary programs. While audits tend to be viewed from a corporate or a management perspective, i.e. top-down, they can inform where and how inspection programs need to be structured and conducted. And then inspections, on the other hand, are the eyes and the ears of the organization, kind of the bottom-up idea. They provide insight into issues and trends from the shop floor or out in the field. Analysis of inspection results can then be used to inform what areas audits need to focus on. So together, they really are kind of a 1-2 punch that provides this holistic view of safety and compliance performance. And together, they can drive the type of continuous improvement that safety leaders are looking for. Of course, the biggest thing that they have in common are checklists. They both utilize checklists. This book here, the Checklist Manifesto, was published 15 years ago, and it demonstrates how effective checklists can be, especially in high-risk industries, things like aviation and surgery, because they can mitigate the impact of like human error and cognitive bias that comes along with things. They can also promote a culture of collaboration. Sometimes, regardless if you have people with specific training or broad subject matter expertise, checklists can help to kind of augment their knowledge by presenting the exact to-dos in order. This book also emphasizes the importance of simplicity when putting checklists together, and we'll talk a little bit about that. It recommends concise checklists over complex ones. And so while we desire simplicity, when it comes to these processes, where we get these checklists and how we put them together has to be a big consideration. So where are people getting checklists now? Obviously, there's no shortage of online resources where you can find things to start your programs. But you should be asking yourself important questions like who created it? How long ago it was created? Have standards or requirements changed since it was put out there? And so while online resources are a good starting point, they definitely won't reflect the unique nature of your operations either, especially facility to facility. And then, of course, how do you ensure your teams are working from the same checklist? You want part of the results is to get this apples to apples comparison, especially with the inspections programs where you're collecting a lot of data. So you want to be able to ensure that people are working from consistent checklists. And finally, when is a simple checklist enough, and when do you need to provide additional guidance to promote consistency? Especially in the world of audits, there's an important concept called reproducibility, and it means that audits conducted by different people under the same conditions should produce the same results. And that takes us up to management systems. So management systems are important because they offer a framework for getting this type of consistency. A solid management system will have many processes, including the identification and tracking of applicable regulatory requirements that apply to your locations. Once those requirements are outlined, you can then cater your audit and inspection programs accordingly. Your management system should include a strong root cause analysis or corrective action process so that when issues are found, you can be confident that actions are being put into place to correct them. And finally, you need something that promotes data exploration and analysis so that you can not only identify immediate corrections, but to look at overarching trends to identify holistic issues that are impacting the organization. And so throughout the plan, do, check, act cycle, both audits and inspections play various roles. And here we've kind of sized the icons to show their relative importance. So obviously in the plan stage, as I mentioned, we're looking at regulatory requirements. We're putting together and planning these programs. In the do stage, inspections take on a greater importance because they're being conducted in high volumes by lots of people. In the check stage, that kind of flips where audits, the comprehensive audits become the primary tool. And then finally, in the act stage, we begin to look at all of this data. We analyze the data collected from these programs so that we can identify areas of concern and opportunities for improvement. And I went one too far. So we're going to take a deeper dive now into these processes, and we're going to start by looking at audit programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay Finnegan.
Thank you, Bob, and welcome everybody. So I'm going to get started talking about audits by looking at a definition which is coming from the grandfather of management systems, ISO 9001, the quality management system, where an audit is this systematic, it's independent, it's a documented process where we're going to look at the evidence and evaluate it. And we're going to look at those four bold words one at a time. So what do we mean by systematic? So that means that we're using a predefined and well-communicated process. And what we're trying to do with the systematic process is that if we raise issues, that the auditees trust the process that created them, that discovered them. Audits are way too often seen as virtually a gotcha tool. And it's not about getting the site. It's about helping the site to improve and to improve its systems to prevent those kind of findings from recurring. The independence. We want trained and knowledgeable, objective auditors because that increases their credibility. So we not only want a process that the auditees will trust, we want to make sure that the auditees trust the people who are discovering any findings. Going back to the ISO, International Standards Organization, there's actually a standard out there that tells us what are the qualifications that an auditor should have. And you see a very quick synopsis of those. Everything from the ability to work independently, versatile, they need to be able to respect the culture of the facility wherever it exists, be able to collaborate with other auditors and with the people at the site, and they need to understand the auditing principles, how to communicate, statistical techniques. If I find one unlabeled container of chemical, is that a systemic error, or is that just kind of a fluke? When do we take those unlabeled containers, secondary containers, and raise them to the level of a finding? We need documentation so that we have to have a detailed record of observations and the evidence that is supporting our conclusion. Bob mentioned the reproducibility. If we had a different auditor who looked at that same evidence, is that other auditor going to draw the same conclusion that we are drawing? And it's the degree of documentation of that evidence that is going to help the sites make an informed decision about how to improve their management systems or their compliance. So what are the parts of an audit protocol? So in general, we need to understand what are the criteria that we're assessing, the question to be answered, and how are we judging that answer? We need to know how to look at that, the review procedures. There may be additional notes and guidelines that will help us understand how are we supposed to interpret the question. And then there's a documentation analysis. This is that evidence that we're going to say, when we just conclude there is a finding, this is why we are concluding that the finding exists. And this is an example of how a software tool might present the audit protocol. At the very top, you see the question that has to be answered. And down at the bottom, you see the answers that we're looking for, a yes or a no. But in the middle, we may have some explanatory notes that tell us how to interpret that question. And we may have some hyperlinks to additional information, the actual regulation, definitions, once again, to help us understand. If we don't understand what the question is asking and how we should be viewing the question, we've got additional information at our fingertips to make sure that we understand how we're assessing it, so that if, again, the future auditor at the same time or the auditee, if they have questions about how did we come to our conclusions, it is right there. The audit report, and this tends to be very detailed. We're going to talk about what was the scope of the audit, what were the objectives, who were the participants from the audit team and from the facility being audited, the dates and locations, what are our criteria, how did we judge things, what findings did we actually come up with, and the relevant evidence that led to those findings, our conclusions. If there are diverging opinions between the audit team and the auditee, figuring out how to resolve those. And an audit, they talk about it, it's a snapshot in time. We may see a facility just on a really bad day. We might see it on a really good day. But we are seeing it as it exists on the day we observed it. And so there's always a risk that what we saw doesn't really represent the day in and day out performance of that facility. So looking at the process, it's a relatively intense process that does take time when we're setting it up. The first thing we have to figure out is what are we actually going to audit? It's going to be a very broad, comprehensive audit. We're going to tailor it. Are we going to generate an audit from scratch? This auditor is one of the Dakota's tools. Or are we going to start from a regulatory profile, which comes out of another one of Dakota's tools? Once we figured out what we're going to be auditing, of course, we have to get on site for the part of the audit that might be on site. Typically, you've got that opening meeting, a site tour. We may have started with some record review even before we got on site, but that's going to keep going. We're going to interview people while we are on site. We are going to be inspecting the facility. And then we're going to be looking at the systems, the procedures, because that's what the audit is targeting, are the systems that help that facility comply with requirements. And this is going to be iterative for the length of time that we are involved in the audit. So we're going to go through the protocol questions. We may have to go back and interview more people or look at more records. Eventually, we're going to get to a point where we are drafting a report. Many facilities then send the report to their legal department for review. And then you come down, ultimately, we've got a closing conference. And ultimately, there is that final report. And once the final report, or even after the draft report comes out, then the facility is going to start a CAPA process to try to start fixing any findings that are coming up or were discovered. And let's talk about a finding. I'm going to turn once again to the ISO 19011, and it's the result of the evaluation of all the evidence against the criteria that we were assessing. I'm going to offer three definitions: correction versus corrective action and preventive action, all of which are defined in ISO 9001, the quality management system. Inspections tend to focus on correction. We see a blocked fire exit, so we want to get that cleared. If we analyze our aggregated inspection results, then now we're starting to shift into corrective action and possibly even preventive action. So because we had a blocked fire exit, is it possible that, as an example, maybe fire extinguishers or electrical panels were also blocked? So we're trying to look broader than just that one circumstances. And then in an audit, we're going to take a look at those bigger issues. If we do have blocked fire extinguishers and exits and electrical panels, what is it that is not working in our system that people don't understand? There are important pieces of equipment that we can't afford to leave to allow to be blocked. We might have the audit scope, and we might be evaluating in the audit where we're looking at really the regulatory compliance. Do we know the rules that apply, and are we in compliance with them? We might also be looking at the management system. If you're registered ISO 45000, you know that focuses more on the systems than on the regulatory side of it, although the regulatory is part of ISO 45000. And the management systems are really about, are we doing what we say we do? And are those systems actually effective? Some of the common benefits: if we are looking at the regulatory side, it helps to ensure that we are complying with safety regulations. It's going to identify the strengths and weaknesses in the management systems. It could result in identifying potential hazards. It definitely can help demonstrate that management is committed to safety. And the big driver, it's continual improvement. So in summary, as Bob said, an audit is a feature-rich type of evaluation. And it's because there are so many things and the level of detail that it's looking at. It's one of the reasons it's held less frequently. That's why it requires a significant preparation. They tend to be much broader in scope than an inspection. We really are looking for a system finding, and that often requires not just a one-off occurrence, but significant evidence, and we're going to have formal documentation. So I have no doubt that any number of you have had issues over your careers about ensuring that the power industrial truck or forklift inspections are conducted at the start of the shift or before use. OSHA does not require an inspection record of those PIT inspections. And so there are some who argue that if our policy is to create a record, and if we generally do, then anytime we don't have a record, that's prima facie evidence of a violation. And for that reason, there are companies that say never create a record because they can only hurt you. So the company I used to work for, we had 2 consecutive audits that we had a paper-based process in place for the inspection of the forklifts. 2 consecutive audits raised findings on that. And the fact that we had the second finding revealed that our management systems, it's not that the inspection process wasn't in place, but it wasn't robust enough. And we had issues within our management system that we had to address to understand how do we make sure that our people are really performing the inspections that are required to be performed. And that brings us to the first of our audits, and I'll let Bob chime in here.
All right, thanks, Jay. Yeah, as mentioned, we're going to do a short poll right here. We want to, again, kind of get a sense of how the audience is feeling. The question we have for you is, which best describes your organization's EHS audit program? So we're looking for the whole environmental health and safety audit scope. So you can go ahead and select just one of these answers. We'll give everyone a few minutes, or sorry, a few seconds, 10, 20 seconds to respond, and then we'll go ahead and advance this and we'll share the results with the group. So again, you can choose, this is a select one, so just go ahead and choose the one that best describes your audit program, and we expect we'll see a wide variety of responses. All right, we'll just give you 5 more seconds here to finish this up, and then we'll go ahead and we will share these results. Okay, looks like most of the responses are in, so we'll go ahead and share those now. Oh wait, hold on, still another block coming in. All right, here we go. Okay, and so everyone should see those on the screen now, and we're seeing let's see here. Combination of internal, external audits seems to be the highest one, followed closely by organizations who do self-assessments, which we definitely hear a lot about, and then team-based audits by site staff. So that's good. And then just about 16% who actually have them conducted by corporate audit teams. And a small amount, surprisingly, that are just the third-party audits only. And then we see at the bottom about 9% ad hoc, no formal audit program at all. So all right. So thank you for responding to that. And now we will go ahead and we're going to turn this over to Susie.
Hey, thank you. I'm Susie. I'm a product at Dakota. I work with our software team. And earlier in my career, I did actually work in EHS and managed a decently large inspection program. So at least to some extent, I have been in your shoes. So as Jay was describing audits, they were that big Cadillac, all the bells and whistles. If we're going to continue that analogy, I would describe inspections then as an e-bike. They're quick, nimble, we're getting in and out, doing just what we need to do. While inspections are more frequent, we've got lighter preparation, a really targeted scope, usually visual checks, and our documentation is pretty informal. Usually just the inspection record itself can count as our documentation. Here are some of the characteristics that make a good inspector. While there's no ISO standard dictating these to us, they're pretty similar. The characteristics that make a good auditor. We want someone with sound judgment, someone who's a self-starter. They need to be well-versed in the regulations and standards that they'll be inspecting. And we need someone that's going to be able to communicate those standards to the people in the workplace. So as I mentioned, I worked to build and manage a decently large inspection program. So I'll be leaning on that experience today to share some tips with you about building and managing your own inspection program. And I'll share a case study at the end of how that program can work with your audits, whether they're internal or external, to improve safety at your facilities. So I'll go through each of these steps in some detail. The first step here is to know your goal. And this one seems probably so simple that it should go without saying, but I've seen in practice it can be really tempting to want to skip this. And this should be obvious. Let me just get out there and start inspecting things. But I really encourage you to sit down and think about what the goal of your inspection program is. Starting with the question, why are you doing inspections? Are there federal or state regulations that apply to your facility? Some of them may require you to do inspections. Are you complying with some corporate initiatives or voluntary standards that you would like to measure yourself against? Or are you generally looking to stay on top of things? You may be looking to do one or even all of these things. And if you take your time to really hone that in, that is going to determine the level of urgency of your inspections, the level of detail you need to go into in your inspections, as well as the expected actions that are going to be coming out of these inspections. So once you know your goal, you can start to build your program. Now, if you're starting from scratch, you're going to need to research the regulations that apply to your facilities, gather any corporate guidelines you may also want to inspect against, make your checklist, which I'm going to jump into a little bit more detail in just a second about. You're going to want to get out there and start inspecting. And then the last point I'd like to make here is that you can iterate as you go, which, because our inspection programs are bottom-up driven, usually it's not someone showing up on our doorstep saying, it's time to do your inspection now, you do have some freedom here. So in the middle of an audit, you can't stop and say, you know what, this question isn't really working for me, or this cadence that we're doing the inspection isn't working for me, I want to change it. For an inspection, we can change that. So if the initial checklist that you start out with doesn't seem to be hitting all the spots, you have some freedom to edit that and do what's going to work best for your organization. One thing I've seen in practice that can really make or break an inspection program is the quality of the checklist you're using. So while checklists are proven to work, they are not all created equal. So I'm going to share some tips with you about how to make sure that your inspection checklists are really going to work well for you. The first tip here is the same first tip as starting your inspection program in general, and that is to know your goal. Just like your inspection program needs to have a very clearly defined goal, so does every checklist that you make. So let's take fire safety, for example. Many of you probably do a more frequent, maybe higher level inspection just to make sure that there's nothing major going on, no major risk areas in your facilities. And maybe you do a less frequent, maybe monthly inspection where you really get in there and look at all the details, check all the documentation that you need to check. It could be really tempting to use the same checklist for both of these. Fire safety is fire safety. I don't want to make two. What you're going to end up with is a checklist that doesn't work well for either situation. It could be too vague for one, too specific for the other. So it's really good to take the time and make sure that every inspection you do has a checklist that is specifically created for that goal. The next tip is to use a simple scoring system. An inspection is really no place for long worded answers, open-ended answers. You want to keep things really simple so that the person answering the question and the person interpreting those answers has no room for ambiguity. They know exactly whether you passed or failed or any extra information you wanted to convey there. You have lots of choices for what sort of scoring system you want to use. And if you've taken your time to define your goal, knowing which one of those works best for you will be easier. So for example, if your inspection is tailored for a very strict federal regulation, you might want to use more of a binary scoring system. Yes, no, pass, fail. That's it. I can look at this very easily and know whether I'm meeting the regulations or not. But if you are going above and beyond a regulation, if you are looking at a corporate initiative rather than a federal standard, or maybe this is your high-level inspection where you're just sweeping through, you may want to use a rating system, maybe a scale of 1 to 5, good, fair, poor, bad, where you don't have that clean cut pass and fail. You leave room to show, hey, I'm not exactly in one of these categories, but I could use some improvement. So if you know your goal, you're going to find the scoring system that works best for you. My last tip here is to add some helpful context to each checklist. And this can be as simple as adding in a citation, letting inspectors and reviewers know what is driving that question. And the reason we want to do this is because we want to add even the littlest bit of context so people doing the inspection and reviewing the inspection can determine the urgency of a failed response. So imagine we have a question that's a failed response, and that failure indicates that we are out of compliance with a federal standard. That may require us to stop work and address immediately, while if we have a failed answer on our voluntary standard or corporate initiative, while we absolutely need to address that, it may not be at quite the urgency or quite the level as our other one. And adding that little bit of context right there in your inspection sheet can give you at least that level 1 bit of context that you need to make that next step. So once your inspection checklists are dialed in, the next thing we focus on in inspections is our quick actions. And this is what we commonly think about when we think about inspections. Most of the things we identify along the way can be fixed on the spot, or if they're not fixed on the spot, they can usually be fixed that same day. So some examples of quick actions we might take on the day of our inspection are addressing any PPE. We're walking through, we see we have several people not wearing the proper PPE. That's usually located somewhere within the facility. We can find it, we can make sure everybody is in compliance. We can properly label containers. We can print them out if we need to, make sure that we have proper labeling on our containers for the day. As long as a spill is small, we can clean that up that day. If we notice that the required signage we need to have hanging is not in the proper spots, we can address that right there on the spot. I often see right after these quick actions, for the most part, we've met the letter of the law at this point. Even if we are required to do inspections, we've done the inspection, we have the record of that inspection, we've done our quick actions. It could be very tempting to say, that's it, let's pack it up for the day. But I think we're really missing an opportunity to elevate our safety even more if we fail to look at our inspections for a particular facility over time, or to compare your inspection results across your different facilities if you have a larger organization, to find some underlying issues. So I'm sure all of us that do inspections have a facility in mind we can think of where we think every single time I go back there, it's the same thing. I'm telling you, this exit is blocked, we need to keep it open. This material is not labeled, we need to keep the labels on. If we're seeing things like that, that could be a sign of an underlying issue that we're going to miss if we're just taking it inspection by inspection and not looking at these over time. So some examples I've seen, and I will share a case study here in just a minute, are things like a new training program. If we're seeing the same failure or the same issue place after place, week after week, we might need to institute a training program because it's very likely that people just aren't aware of what they're supposed to be doing. We might want to implement a new labeling system or upgrade our storage. Some examples here I've seen are where I have several facilities that are struggling and one that's doing great. Well, let me take that example of my facility that's doing great. Let me make my struggling facilities not need to reinvent the wheel. Let's just implement that system organization-wide. And sometimes we might find a new technology that we need to integrate. Some new sensors or new alarms may help us identify problems before they become issues, or some way to digitize our systems might help us keep a better tab on what's going on. So I can share an example from my past year of how our inspection program was able to move from doing quick fixes and quick actions at a facility by facility level to some comprehensive improvements, and how that tied into our audit. So in my experience, the organization I worked at prior to my being there, pretty much every facility was its own kingdom. So it was up to that particular manager, how well they were meeting any standards. And we had decided it was time for some organization level standards. So when we first got out there and we're looking at things, we realized it just ran the gamut. We had the full spectrum of compliance, really. So I've got some pictures here of, on the left under my quick actions, of some of my hall of shame here for hazardous waste storage. You'll see a truck bed here. This was actually explained to me as a secondary containment area. And if I zoomed in, you would see that there are some open containers, open 5-gallon buckets of used oil and some other unlabeled materials under this. We worked with them, you know, week after week. This isn't okay. We need to move this up to standards. We got to our, you know, A for effort photo here, where we do have, you know, an attempt was made for some secondary containment. But this lower picture here, we have our yellow containment. Here, we still see unlabeled containers. We still see that we have buckets without lids. None of this is undercover. So we were going back week after week. We were seeing these small improvements, but we weren't getting there. So we did know that this wasn't all of our facilities. We had some facilities who were doing really well. So what we decided to do was go through, document what they were doing, and really bring those people in and bring all of our facilities up to the standard they needed to be. This took about a year to do, so it wasn't a very overnight process, but we were able to get there, and we wouldn't have been able to identify the issues at all, or come up with an easy system to get everybody into compliance without our very regular inspection program. So the next time we had an audit, we were feeling pretty good. And for the most part, that audit went well. We had been really focusing in on hazardous waste storage. The audit, however, did find a few things that were gaps in our program. So for us, in the area of hazardous waste we were focusing on, we had really been looking at, you know, those big rocks we needed to move, which were our official hazardous waste storage areas. We had overlooked some of the accidental or incidental places where hazardous waste can end up in the normal trash. For us, this was oily rags and fluorescent bulbs. So we had the audit that raised a red flag and highlighted the gap in our program. Some action items came out of that. For us, this was a service for our bulbs and rags, updating training. A big part of this issue was just the knowledge of what can and can't go in the normal trash. And the kicker for us here that really helped us was that we updated our inspection program. We realized we hadn't been checking as detailed and as frequently as we should have been in the regular trash. So here we have a photo of me glamorously looking in a dumpster, which I did on an almost weekly basis for years, to make sure we didn't have hazardous waste in there. We had we not only inspected the normal trash, we inspected our signage, nothing fancy. We had printed out signs and spray paint, but really just drilling it in and week by week getting out there doing those continuous checks via our updated inspection program really worked to change the culture, and our next audit was much more successful. So hopefully that tied into for you how you can build an inspection program, use it to make some quick fixes, comprehensive changes, and how that can tie in with your audit program and work together to elevate safety throughout your facilities. And with that, I'm going to toss back to Bob.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Susie. So we're going to do our last poll here then. So everyone should see a poll on the screen. This is a multi-choice, so you can select all that apply to you. The question is, what are your current environmental health and safety inspection goals? So we know most of you, if not all of you, have some type of inspection program in place. So we're just kind of looking to see what your main drivers are right now within your programs. Susie talked about having a goal, defining goals up front. So we want to understand what some of your goals are. And then we'll go ahead and we'll share those results with the group as soon as we have a majority of responses in. So looks like we're moving pretty good. Just going to give you about 10 more seconds. I know we have a few, we have to make multiple choices here, so it might take a little bit more time. Okay, looks like things are slowing down, so just give you a few more seconds here, and then we'll go ahead and share those out. All right, so here they come. All right, so here are the results, your current EHS inspection goals. Reducing incidents and injuries, always a top one we've seen, and that's coming in about 78%. Identifying areas of hazards and areas of risk, of course, is also a big one. 3% with no formal inspection program in place, so that's not that unheard of. We definitely hear that from time to time, and regulatory compliance is pretty close to the top at about nearly 70%. All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating in that, and we're going to wrap it up here. But before we do, we're going to move on to QA in a little bit. I just have a few more notes to kind of tie some of this together. So we want to move on. We want to talk about having the right tool for the right job. So throughout the presentation, we've been using this analogy of e-bikes and versus Cadillacs. And this not only applies to the nature of programs, but to the tools that you need to manage these programs. And so we're really talking about software here. So when you think of inspection, think of it like an e-bike, as Susie said, nimble, easy to use, optimized for mobile, lots of different people utilizing this tool. So it needs to have easy access to the checklists. Management needs to be able to easily create, update, and share these across the organization. And then obviously being able to analyze that data. I've seen some questions that have come in already that people are talking about frequency of analysis and type of data that you can be extracting from that. And then we shift on to audits and we think of the software like a Cadillac, more feature-rich, team-oriented, really intended for power users, meaning like your subject matter experts. Because they're regulatory focused, we want to have some type of linkage to regulatory citations. And then because the findings that come from audits tend to be longer tail, we need some type of root cause analysis and corrective action tracking tool. So regardless of what solution you're looking for, there's all kinds of reasons to do this digitally. Standardizing programs, we know, is one of the key things people tell us they want. They want to have control over what templates are utilized and by who, and be able to update them in a timely manner, making sure that people have access to those when they need it. Real-time data is something we hear, so being able to quickly identify issues and address them. And then, of course, when it comes to the information that's captured during these processes, being able to do analysis to understand issues, but also to demonstrate improvement and that things have been fixed, especially important from a compliance standpoint. So Dakota offers, as I mentioned earlier on, a suite of software solutions, but we offer a lot more than that. Our solutions incorporate regulatory content as well as regulatory and EHS and technology expertise. So this Dakota's in-house regulatory experts, really, they can be an extension of your compliance and safety teams. What they do, what our in-house team does, is continually review the Federal Register. They translate these requirements, they categorize that content, and they add it to our regulatory database so that our clients can use these for compliance planning, but also verification in form of audit and inspections. At the heart of this solution is an applicability engine. This is think of it like TurboTax, where you answer yes/no questions to determine what regulatory requirements at a site level apply to the various sites. So our users use these to create evergreen compliance profiles that they can then base their audits on and inform their inspection programs. And so tying it back to the software, yes, inspections, audits, different types of processes, and they definitely require different types of tools. But having that those regulatory requirements driving the programs is really critical. And both our inspections and audit tools come out of the box with audit protocols, audit questions, and a library for inspections, a library of environmental health and safety inspection related questions. And in the center of all this, of course, is analysis. Final note, we're going to toot our own horns here. Both our inspection, auditing, and analytics products have all recently been recognized by environmental health and safety organizations, as well as technology review websites. So long story short, we know a thing or two about safety and compliance management. So we hope you got a lot out of that presentation. In summary, audits and inspections, similar but distinct. both play an important role in the Plan, Do, Check, Act process, which really should be, the processes should be aligned through your management systems. And then you want to make sure that you have the right tools that can help you do all of these things more effectively. So I think we're ready to. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a bunch. We got some great stuff in the inbox for questions already, so let's dive in. But Jay, Susie, Bob, that was a terrific presentation. So let's start off with kind of a basic one. How should companies prioritize corrective actions identified during EHS audits compared to those identified during inspections?
Jay, would you like to start with this one? I'm sure Susie can add to it. Jay, are you on mute? All right, we're not hearing Jay right now. Susie, do you want to take that one?
If not, I can move on to another one.
Sure, I can start. My suggestion would be when you're getting findings coming out of an audit, the way that I would prioritize would be based on the risk of the finding itself. So some sort of, usually auditors are happy to walk through those findings with you and help you prioritize which one is of the greatest risk to your organization, whether that is the safety to your workers and or potential fines associated if there are. And I find that most auditors are happy to sit there and work through that with you, which ones are the biggest ones that need to be addressed first, and which ones, while needs to be addressed, can possibly wait a bit. And Jay, you probably have something to add to that from your auditing experience.
I think Jay might be experiencing a mic problem. I could be wrong.
Okay.
But I'll go on to the next question, and then we can always, Jay, we can always circle back if you got another comment on that one. During the webinar, you guys talked about auditor qualifications, and one of those qualifications was being perceptive. Could you go a little bit more into that? What qualifies as perceptive? What does that mean?
I can speak here again in lieu of Jay's mic. I believe what we're thinking about perceptive here is where Jay's talking about, you're there as an auditor and you're seeing that facility on that day, and you need to be able to determine if you're looking at a systemic issue or something that's just a bad day. So knowing when you need to dig a little deeper and see, is this issue that I'm identifying here, do we need to do a root cause analysis here? Is this a symptom of a larger problem, or is this something I can note as a finding and move on?
Sounds good. Also related to that, are there good certifications, are there certifications for EHS that you feel are, really good when it comes to audits?
That would be a great one for Jay to answer if he is coming back, or maybe we can pause it until he does return.
There you go. All right. I'll go on to the next one. So this is a good one, and it is. Let's talk about scale of inspections. What scale of inspections are these programs in terms of reports per year? And do you have experience with when groups might compare results?
Sure. So in the examples that I was sharing, these inspections were monthly. So we had nearly 100 facilities. So getting to them more than once a month was a trial for us. So what we started off with was monthly inspections, and we did then prioritize more frequent follow-up with the facilities where we found issues that needed to be addressed immediately. We worked directly with their management teams to make sure that once those things were identified, we would follow up within a week, and we needed to be, getting photographic evidence that things were moving along if we weren't able to meet with them in person. And a great place to share results, I would say at a management level and at a team level. We would have our departmental meetings where the leaders of all the facilities get together. And that was a great place to compare results and maybe put some positive peer pressure in there for everyone to be coming up to standards. And I also would frequently go to our monthly safety meetings, which is more than just our managers, where everybody's involved, and share some highlights there. And that's a great place to influence culture and really get some pride in the changes you're making towards a more proactive safety environment.
Okay, let's take the other side of the spectrum in terms of size. Are there options for companies with, say, smaller than 10 users, or smaller workforces? Is there even like a single user kind of scale for this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of the auditor, our auditing tool especially, we're used to that. I think the nature of inspections kind of lends itself to more collaboration, so more users collecting data that's my take on that. We haven't really experienced single usage for inspection, but for auditor, people who use it independently, we've definitely seen that.
Got it. All right. It sounds like Jay is back with us. Jay, I've got a question for you. When it comes to certifications for auditors, are there some certifications that you suggest companies look for?
I don't have any recommendations for certification. There are some well-known organizations out there. One of the most famous is the Certified Professional Environmental Auditor. But, that's on the E side, not the health and safety side. There was a question I definitely want to address that came in about the forklift inspections. I did not say you shouldn't be doing inspections. What I said is that OSHA does not require a record of the inspection. So if you are generating records, and that is your procedure, and an OSHA inspector comes in there and they find days that you don't have a record, that is prima facie evidence of a violation. So whether or not you generate a record, there are definitely some people, both lawyers and non-lawyers, who will say, don't generate a record. In fact, one of my old bosses said this, don't generate the record ever, because it can only hurt you. Now, another question that was raised there is about a daily inspection when you operate 24/7. What OSHA actually says is it has to be inspected before every shift. So if you're operating 24/7, you don't need one record per day, or I'm going to say one inspection per day. You actually need a minimum of 3. So you still got to do the inspections. The question is, do you want to generate a record?
There you go. All right. So we have maybe time for 1-2 questions if we're lucky. I'm going to ask this one because I thought it was a good one. Is an assessment closer to an inspection or an audit?
It's one of these things where the term can be used generally, pretty broadly. I normally think of assessment. An audit, I think of is that's when that corporate team or the third parties come on site. The assessment, I would normally add the word self in front of it, where I'm looking at the same content as an auditor or as the audit, but I'm judging it myself, an internal self-assessment. Personal opinion, I'm not saying that's right or wrong.
Okay. And then last question. When creating a checklist, do you find it more effective to structure them around, say, facility or functional areas, by hazard categories, or maybe some other criteria?
This one, I played around with this a lot in doing lots of inspections. And what I ultimately landed on was the inspection checklists that work best for me were ones ordered in the way that I knew I was going to walk the facility, because I found if I was sitting at my computer thinking about functional areas, I might find myself spiraling around the facility when I actually went to do that inspection. So I would ask the questions I needed in a particular area and the order that I knew I was going to walk through, which did take me some iteration to get to, but that was a good balance for our team in terms of making the most use of our time.
There you go. All right, that sounds great. Guys, we're going to have to end the Q&A there. Remember, everyone, in the next day or two, we're going to be emailing you all a link to an archived version of the webinar so that you can go back and review it or share it. But with that, we're going to sign off. Before we do, I want to give a few notes of thanks. First off, I want to take a moment to thank our expert speakers, Jay Finnegan, Susie Housley, and Bob Kimball of Dakota Software. Everyone, that was a terrific presentation.
Thank you.
And also, thanks one last time to our sponsors for today's webinar, Dakota Software. Again, many thanks to them for making the presentation possible. And last but not least, I want to give everybody out in the audience a thanks for listening in and participating with us today. You're the reason we do this, so thanks very much for the interest and involvement. Okay, with that, we're going to sign off. I hope everyone has a great rest of the week, but for now, goodbye until the next Occupational Health and Safety webinar.